I'm Ellen Myers, the Programs and Communications Director for the Newton Free Library. And I want to thank you all for tuning into this important session on social isolation and loneliness, the impacts and solutions. It certainly is an unusual time, and I hope that you and those who hold dear are doing well. Please know that the library has a wealth of programs for all ages, which you can learn about by visiting newtonfreelibrary.net. By way of housekeeping, everyone will be muted until the end of the session. You'll be able to chat with the hosts, although not with anyone else. We'll be monitoring the chat box throughout the program and answer questions until the end. The chat box appears in different places depending on what device you're using, so you may have to look around to find it. Also, as my colleague Alana has mentioned, this session will be recorded, and we do ask that you keep your video muted. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Jane Colino, the Director of the Department of Senior Services.
Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you to this program tonight. And we are very excited that we are able to do this program tonight. When the world shut down, we thought that this was a very important topic prior to that. And I think we can all relate to why it's even more important today. And I'm very thankful for our relationship with the library and our ability to bring this program to, it looks like, over 60 people right now through our Zoom platform. So I'd like to just take a few minutes and introduce, I'm not going to take a few minutes, I'm going to ask the mayor to take a few minutes and just say hello. We're very grateful to have Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller with us this evening to open up our program. And she has been very supportive of all of the efforts that address this overall topic. And this is a topic close to her heart, and I'm thankful that she's here tonight. Mayor?
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to try to gather together here on Zoom. We all wish we could be doing this kind of in person if we could, but it feels good to be surrounded by so many Newtonians. To say a huge thank you to Ellen and Jane, who are always here helping us. Marian, Ryan, our fabulous DA. And by the way, am I also echoing?
A little bit, Mayor.
I think we're all having that trouble. It's not just some of us. And I apologize to all of us on Zoom land. Marian is our wonderful DA here in Middlesex County, and her interests are broad and deep, and this is just another one when she's thinking about our older residents. To Janet and Val, I heard such good things about both of you, so we're in for a treat. And there's this strange thing about COVID-19, as Jane said, we had been thinking deeply at our Senior Services Division about loneliness and social isolation, and now so many people in Newton have been feeling it firsthand. So there's a whole cadre of us who really are empathizing, and we've all seen the widespread impact on emotional well-being, physical well-being, as we've been shut into our various homes and residence and apartments. Thank you to the leadership of Jane and Ellen and Marian, and look forward. I've got to duck out to a school committee meeting, but I can't. Jane, you've got to fill me in on what Janet and Val say tomorrow so I can learn a little bit about it. Take care, everybody. Really do hope to join together on Zoom or some other way soon. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.
Much,
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Fuller, for adding us to your agenda tonight. We really appreciate it. I am going to give a brief introduction to each of our speakers tonight, and then each of them will speak. They have all of them provided me with wonderful biographies. I am going to shorten them, especially given the technical difficulties that we had tonight already. So I'm going to introduce DA Ryan first. Marian Ryan has been with the Middlesex District Attorney since 2013. And before that, she played many roles in the district attorney's office. And her hallmark of her administration has been for equal commitment to addressing crime and other public safety issues. But she's taken a particular acknowledgement in her leadership of initiatives that are aimed at keeping children safe and protecting older residents in our community. And I know a particular focus has been protecting older residents from being victims of scams. So we're very glad you're here tonight, DA Ryan. Next on the panel is Janet Seckel-Cerrotti. Janet is the Executive Director of FriendshipWorks, an interfaith volunteer organization, caregiving organization, program that has been serving older residents in Boston for over 35 years. Janet played a number of different roles in the organization when she became the executive director, the first founding executive director of FriendshipWorks in 1991. And their goal has been exactly what we're talking about tonight, is to eliminate and to reduce social isolation and loneliness. Janet holds an MSW degree from Hunter College and has a lot of tools in her tool bag. One of the most recent interactions we've had over the last year and a half is a contract with FriendshipWorks, and they are working with the City of Newton to provide a friendly visiting program. They work closely with Julie Joy, our volunteer coordinator, who's also on the phone, on the call, I'm sorry. And Alana Seidman is our program coordinator, who's also on the call. So we welcome you, Janet, from FriendshipWorks, and are very interested in seeing how all of you contribute to this topic overall. And then last on our panel tonight is Val Walker. And Val is a rehabilitation consultant and the author of The Art of Comforting, which won a Nautilus Book Award and was recommended by the Boston Health Commission as a guide for families after the Boston Marathon bombings, and how to seek and gain comfort. Val's latest book is 400 Friends and No One to Call, Breaking Through Isolation and Building Community. And again, one of the important things we wanted to get across here tonight is that isolation and loneliness is not just an aging issue. It's an issue that cuts across all ages, affects us individually, and affects us as a community. And so we're so pleased tonight to have this panel, and we will start tonight with DA Ryan.
Thank you so much, Jane. And I want to thank Mayor Fuller for bringing us all together, as well as both Jane and Ellen. You know, one of the things I say very often is it's easy when something isn't going well to think about who's responsible for that. We don't, are not always as good at thinking about how well things go and who's responsible for that. And in Newton, you have lots of things, especially around a lot of the senior issues, that go incredibly well. I've seen, as I've been watching people sign in from the waiting room, lots of folks I know from my frequent opportunities to speak at the senior center. I know the mayor's efforts to try to get a new and bigger center. And that's of a piece that is important, and we don't always think about how well that's going. But to turn to the issue of loneliness, and I think one question might be, why does that matter to the district attorney's office? And it really matters to us in a number of areas. So let me take you back a little bit to how we really first started thinking about this, because as we've all seen during the pandemic, there's been all sorts of discussion about loneliness, and it's an epidemic, and what does it mean, and how can we do better? And if you need no other reason to be concerned about this, think about the fact that the former Surgeon General of the United States has said that the impact of loneliness on your physical health is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And, you know, we are in a place now where smoking itself is recognized for the health hazard it is. Certainly somebody smoking 15 cigarettes a day we would be very concerned about. So that's the level of concern that we're at. And our first focus on this came about 1.5 years ago, when one of our charges is to respond to any death that takes place outside of a hospital setting. So any, we call them an unattended death. And we noticed that by June of 2019, we had seen 52 people across the county. And Middlesex is a big county, 1.6 million people, 54 cities and towns. But we had seen 54 people who had taken their own life. And that was a very dramatic increase from where we had been in the past 5-10 years. And 25% of those were people over the age of 60, which by statute is the definition for people being seniors in Massachusetts. And when you started to take apart the reports that we would see about that, it was tragically very often something akin to one report, which was an individual who was found by his landlord to have taken his own life. The landlord's visit was prompted by a call from a friend who had noted that the person who was dead had been feeling even more lonely and disconnected than they had before. That several weeks had gone by and he realized he hadn't heard from that person, and he reached out to the landlord and sent the landlord into the house. And those were the kinds of reports we were seeing of people, first of all, very often so disconnected as to not have anybody who was looking for them for a fairly long period of time. And at the same time that we were seeing that, we were seeing a significant uptick in terms of people who were dying because of a drug overdose, but now very different than what we had seen before. It was not people with their friends using and suffering an overdose. It was people in their home, usually locked away in a bedroom by themselves and overdosing. So those were two pieces where we knew we needed to be really looking at that issue. And then really the sort of perennial issue for us is around people being taken advantage of, kinds of scams, whether it's money or property. Every single year, we literally have millions of dollars that disappear from people across our county, not all seniors, but a large, excuse me, a large percent of them are seniors, which they give over to people that they've developed an email correspondence with or a phone conversation with. And also, as I say often when I come to the senior center, in situations where if I stood up when I stand up at the senior center and say, this is what happened, this is the message that somebody received by phone or email, and they gave over $100,000 to that person, everybody laughs and says no one would ever be foolish enough to do that. And but they do. And that's because those scams really thrive in places of secret or with people who are lonely. And scammers are good at that. Scammers become friends, if you will. They're calling every day, they're talking, they're exchanging information, and they are at the same time taking more and more away from people. So we looked across the country and across the world and really discovered that in 2019, and what pretty bold move, but also gives you some perspective on how widespread this problem is, that in 2019, the United Kingdom had actually created the position of Minister of Loneliness, made it a cabinet level position, and launched a variety of initiatives around how could we address that situation. We also began looking at what could we implement in terms of first educating ourselves and then thinking about what structures we already had in place. So last year, we first, to educate ourselves, convened a panel of experts to talk about what is really loneliness. What's the difference between being socially isolated and something that we could not have imagined last June, that we would all be experiencing that isolation, and that the difference between that and loneliness. and what are ways that we can address that. For instance, one of the things we learned during that panel was the tool of QPR, which is question, persuade, and refer. When people, you don't have to be trained, can have a conversation and realize that people, they should be concerned about people's loneliness, they're concerned that they might hurt themselves, and how to ask those questions, how to make referrals, how to really do something. So we've now provided that training to not necessarily people you would always think about, but lots of our elder care facilities. We've talked about, we provided it for people at the State House, because often people make their way to the State House, and I'm sure it's true for City Hall as well, when they feel that everyone's against them, they don't have anywhere else to go. So we've spent a lot of the time doing that with our first responders, that very often when they're, whether it's police, fire, ambulance, they are responding for one thing, but they're also seeing the impact of people that really are suffering from loneliness, and maybe their other physical, emotional, or mental health needs are being exacerbated by that problem. We also started thinking about who's likely to see people who are lonely. So we trained really, for instance, one of the folks we discovered see a lot of people, two categories of people are really mailmen, right? We often find out things when the mailmen have been delivering the mail and notice it's not getting picked up. So we did a training about that piece with them. The second was firemen. Lots of people who don't go to see their doctor, who don't talk to a lot of other people, have the occasion where they fall and they make a call to the fire department. The fire department comes out. And taking a piece from the English program, we started really talking to them about, while you're in the house, don't just go in and pick somebody up. Take a look around. See, is there any food there? Is the clothing of that person in good repair? Does it seem as though no one else has been there? We've had people go in, unfortunately, first responders, usually firefighters, and find houses literally flooded, houses where the heat hasn't been turned on. And how do we address those pieces? And that is really critical to kind of breaking that cycle of people being isolated, befriending folks that don't have their best interests at heart, and then becoming victims of crime. With respect to the drug use, and very often people, by the time they've been using drugs so long, they're likely to suffer an overdose. They have burnt a lot of bridges with people, and they are very much cut off from their family, their friends. They're feeling the stigma. They've lost now the 13th job, and they're feeling very isolated. So we began doing public service announcements and trainings with people about really making those connections, checking on people. We've seen a real change. It's interesting because we will see overdoses tend to happen in what we call surges. There are a certain number every week, every month, and then suddenly, seemingly for no reason, on a random Tuesday, we will see a very dramatic spike. And we used to be really pretty powerless about that. It was like a tsunami. We would then spend the next 36 or 72 hours seeing that those deaths occur. Once we began doing this public service reach out, getting some television stations that were interested in that would carry our message about making those connections. The amazing thing was when a surge would happen and we would activate that, it ended the surge. We had never been able to do that before. So we know that these programs have an impact. We know that they work. And very often they are programs that are, especially in these fiscal times, they're relatively inexpensive programs, but they are a way to really connect with people and change their lives. So that's sort of a broad base of why we're involved in this, what we've been doing about that, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to Janet at this point to talk a little bit about her work.
Great. Thank you so much, DA Ryan. And I think some of what I'm going to say is so related to what you just talked about in terms of the isolation and loneliness. And I have some slides to show everybody in a few minutes. But first, I want to say that I'm so sorry that we're not seeing everybody's faces here. And I know why, but I'm noticing and seeing some friends and familiar people, some who I haven't seen in a while, and many of you who I have never met. So I appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the enduring work and mission of FriendshipWorks at this time, and to say that some of the referrals we have gotten a lot of times have been from people who you know, might have otherwise called their doctor regularly or the fire department or emergency because they just really are lonely. But then also just people like everybody on this phone, on this call, or many of us who may not have strong social connections for one reason or another. So let me start maybe with the, I don't know if we have a first slide there that somebody else is showing about FriendshipWorks. And if not, I can do without it.
Ellen, are you able to bring that up?
I can start talking while we are showing the slides. What's fine is that I wanted to say that the FriendshipWorks celebrated its 36th year in April, and our enduring mission has been to reduce social isolation, improve quality of life, and maintain the dignity of older adults. When we started, nobody was really talking about social isolation. People thought frail, isolated older adults is not something that was on the mindset of folks. And we have continued with that mission. Our programs have changed a little bit over the time, but which I'll talk about in a minute. But our constant programs have been friendly visiting and medical escorts. Our vision, our enduring vision kind of is really to end elder isolation and create connection. Next, so this is next slide, please. So reducing social isolation, enhancing the quality of life, and maintaining the dignity of older adults is our mission, and our vision is ending elder isolation, creating connection. I think I sent you an old slideshow, but that's okay. Let's keep moving. Not the newest. Next slide, please. So our history, just so you know, is we were originally funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in 1984. And I always like to tell people that because the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is one of the largest medical foundations in the country. And they funded 25 interfaith volunteer programs throughout the United States to see whether volunteers could play some of the role that friends and family, you know, would normally play. But sometimes when people don't have friends or family around in the 1960s and 70s, when mobility was becoming easier and people were flying, you know, us young folks who were young then were, you know, going, leaving maybe our home communities to find jobs out of necessity or to find ourselves, and our parents and grandparents were maybe staying in place and were aging in place without necessarily their family supports. Also, more people weren't having children. And so there was an exploration, a 3-year seed grant to see what a difference this would make. And indeed it was found very valuable. And then it was given to the community to continue to fund. And in Boston, Greater Boston, we've been very lucky that the community has been interested in the program and continued to help keep FriendshipWorks going. We serve Boston, Brookline, now Newton, and in July we will be starting our work in Somerville and Cambridge. So here's just a slide to show you a little bit of some of our photos of you know, some of our friendly visiting matches. You can see that some of them are, you know, they're men and women, volunteers of different ages, different ethnicities. Some of our volunteers are older. Here, most of our volunteers in these pictures tend to be younger, but we have, you can volunteer from the age of 18 to, you know, 100, whatever. I think our oldest volunteers in their 90s, but we do have a lot of volunteers in their 20s and 30s and 40s, but also in 50s, 60s, and 70s. So the whole idea is to make a match, kind of like Fiddler on the Roof, or really be careful about looking at who are you as an older adult, what are your interests, what are your passions, what do you like to talk about, who would you like as a friend, you know, if you could choose your own friend, but maybe you can't get out into the community as much, or it's a little bit harder when we get out. And then we recruit volunteers, as I said, 18 and older, and we also ask them about themselves and about their interests, about their proximity, you know, to different areas, about how much they might want to travel, if they prefer male or female, if they have allergies, if somebody has a cat or dog. So taking everything into account, and then we try and make a match for somebody who's referred themselves or been referred by somebody else and with a volunteer. And our name, which used to be Match Up Interfaith Volunteers, and now FriendshipWorks, talks about a duality, because it's not about doing something for an elder. It is about a friendship. It is about creating a relationship. And all of us need a friend. And sometimes, because just the way life is structured, it's hard to make new friends, particularly when you're not able to get out and you're not working as much. And so that's what we do. We're matchmakers. I'm going to come back to friendly visiting, because I think this might be the program that most of you are interested in, and it is the program that FriendshipWorks has in Newton right now. But I'm going to show you a little bit about our other programs and then get back to this. So if we could see the next slide, please. So here's our Friendly Helping program, and this is our program. So our major program, Friendly Visiting, is about building long-term, maybe lifelong friendships. And some of our matches have lasted 18, 20, 25 years. Others last 2 years or 3 years. Our average is about 2.5 years. And it may end because somebody has moved, their life has changed, you know, or something of that sort. But usually once we ask for an 8 to 10 month commitment from the volunteer, and then usually when somebody's a friend, as long as they can, they will stay that, because they're friends, and they will follow the older adult, their friend, if they move from their own independent home to an assisted living to a nursing home, unless they move far enough away that they cannot visit with them. But today, of course, we use the phone a lot too. Our Friendly Visiting and Medical Escort program are more about our short-term, one-time short-term assistance. And Friendly Helping, I think about, are those things that those of us who are able-bodied take for granted. You know, might be filling out a form, but you might be visually impaired and you can't do that. It might be going to the cemetery on the anniversary of a loved one's death. That really lifts your, you know, gives you your spirit, you know, something to hold on to, but you can't get there on their own. You could be married to somebody for 50 years and your spouse moves to a nursing home just 4 or 5 miles away, but how do you get there if you have some mobility issues or something like that? But a volunteer can take you and let you visit and then come home with you. And it can be one of my more favorite stories is really the things that bring joy, not just necessity. We do necessity and joy is we have more than once taken somebody who has loved the sea, including a man who actually had spent his life on the sea and now lives just 7 miles away, let's say in Newton or something like that, and could not get to see the ocean. And a volunteer took him in his car and they sat in the Revere Beach and just watched, then helped him out of the car and sat on a bench to stay and sit by the ocean. And we've had other opportunities like that for an afternoon, got ice cream together and then drove home. What a gift, and what a lift for months and months, just that memory of something that was so important to you, but you don't have access to without a volunteer or a friend doing that. And in this picture with Friendly Helping, you see this gentleman, you know, who is blind here, the one who has the cane, and then the other gentleman who's reading him some information. And they used to meet outside of the library because he didn't have a mobility issue, just as a vision impairment. And so they decided that that's how they would do it. And that's somewhere near Copley Square. I think that picture was taken. Our medical escort program is something where we do well over 1,000 rides a year, and that is going with it's door through door, going with someone to a medical appointment, staying with them in the waiting room. If requested, going into the appointment with them. Some people want that, some don't. And making sure that person gets home safely, stopping at the pharmacy if necessary, or getting some milk. This is so important. We have surveyed the people who use our medical escort program. We are not a transportation program or a medical escort program, and that many people would not go to the doctors without the support. It is for people who have mobility or issues, you know, anxiety issues, who just wouldn't do it. And many people, you know, you might get really afraid of getting a negative prognosis and to be there alone, but to have somebody with you. Or we've been in the waiting room with somebody who's diabetic, and, you know, you wait and wait and wait, and you might go into some kind of diabetic shock and nobody's recognizing it, but your volunteer is there and they're sitting with you to go get a snack for you. Advocating, sometimes, the appointment runs over. So if you have gotten the ride or some other transportation and they've left without you because your schedule, is not on their schedule, people will sit in the hospital for hours and nobody is there, unfortunately, because our health system has a lot of issues, and nobody will help you get home. So the medical escort volunteer will make sure that, we find some transportation and go with you home. So our idea is to get somebody to laugh or to lighten their burden so that they can actually hear what the doctor is saying and not be so anxious that you've gotten there, but your mind is spinning, as we all know that can happen when we're waiting and anxious, and that there's a friend with you that can help listen with you or write things down if necessary so that you can get most out of your medical appointment. Next slide, please. And then we do things for joy. And hopefully, and I think that friendships are full of joy, and that's why we build friendships, and we all feel that we need them. But we have some programs that are a few group programs, and that is our pet visitation program called Pet Pals, and that's mostly outreach to nursing homes and assisted living. Our Relaxing Through the Arts, which is about bringing, well, I will say one more thing about Pet Pals. It is a human being with their animal, or their animal brings their human being to a nursing home assisted living on a weekly basis, so that we will go room to room or do it in a group. And for so many people who loved pets and had their pets but can't have them anymore, or maybe this is the first time that they are receiving the unconditional love of a dog or a cat. Sometimes we've had a guinea pig and we've had a bird, but mostly they're dogs. And the joy and the love that comes both from a human and particularly from the animal that really loves going there. The Relaxing Through the Arts is a small program we have that's particular to nursing homes, and it is bringing the beauty of nature and the sensories of nature, leaves in the fall, flowers in the spring, a little bit of snow and flakes in the winter, thinking about them, remembering them, imagining them, and doing some haiku or some crafts together around the issue of, the outdoors and sensory things. For people who still have their cognition in nursing homes, it's meant for people who still have their memory, not necessary for people who are memory impaired. And then we have FriendshipWorks, which is our most recent program. It's a partnership with Goddard House where we bring music, including instruments. It's not about performing, it is about playing music, singing together with older adults in elder buildings, not nursing home or assisted living, but many some elder buildings have very little activity going on, and people don't trust each other, and there's a lack of socialization or of activities. And so our thing is to create connection through music. That music itself viscerally is such an important part of our soul, but it can also be used to bring people together, sing together, play instruments, and body, mind, and then get to know each other. So when they see each other in the elevator, other times they have this experience that they share together and a trust that they've built. Next slide, please. So this is just, I just wanted to show you a picture, and this is a marvelous quote that I love that was sent to us by this gentleman. He's a gentleman that's been matched now for 6 years with the same volunteer, and she speaks about how much she has learned from him. But Peter wrote to us a letter of gratitude, which was lovely, unsolicited, about his match. But he said, solitude is a healthy ability to enjoy one's own company, but isolation goes over the line into starvation for human society and the nourishment it provides. Peter is also somebody actually who I believe referred himself, which is pretty unusual. Most people don't identify that way or they feel that there's some stigma. Of course, at FriendshipWorks, we feel that there is no stigma to being lonely or isolated. Life happens, things happen in our lives, in our social communities, in our physical, our physicality that we don't have control of, things, and that we're all not that, most people, unless they have really big families and huge friendship circles, and some people do have that and are really, really blessed, but sometimes, people's children live far away. Many don't have children. Sometimes children predecease their parents. I remember the first time I got a call from somebody and they wanted us to take their the spouse wanted us to take their spouse to to a doctor's appointment. I'm like trying to figure out what that is, and their child was 70 years old. It's like you can take you who had more illnesses than the parents. So we're all living a little longer, or many are, and we don't know what those family structures are. My one hope with COVID-19 is maybe some of the stigma of saying I am lonely or I am socially isolated will go away, and people might be more willing to identify themselves and not feel bad that they are lonely or isolated. And I wanted just to say something to D.A. Ryan's description of social isolation and loneliness, is that loneliness is that inherent feeling that we all feel. If we're human beings, we've all felt lonely. Some people feel lonely all the time. They have their whole life. But sometimes we are most lonely in a crowd, or we're lonely with somebody that you can be lonely if you're living with somebody who you don't have a comfort with. And you can be lonely because you have become isolated and your friends and family are not around. Social isolation is really when you don't see anybody on a regular basis. You really have no, contact on a regular basis. And that is so important. Both are very harmful to health, as we've heard earlier, just about equally. And you can feel you can be alone and not be lonely. You can be socially isolated and not lonely. But the problem with social isolation also is that nobody is there to notice that there's no food in your refrigerator. Nobody's there to notice that last week you looked really great, and this week and the week after you're all of a sudden not looking as good, and you don't realize your own diminishment that something is going on. Nobody's there to do that. And to help out with those small things, and to bring them to your attention, or to help refer you to somebody else, or to help in any way. So social isolation is really a lack of regular contact with another human being who sees you on a social basis. So I just want to say this, the next slide, please, is just who refers us. Healthcare organization, you can look at this yourself: healthcare organizations, human service organizations, elder housing managers, faith communities, senior centers, elder groups, family, friends, city, municipal agencies, and some self-referrals, and everything in between. Sometimes the daughter in California who calls because their parent is here in Massachusetts, or somebody here, just you moved here from another state to be with family, but your family's not the end all. So you can want a friend even when your family around, because sometimes your family can bug you a lot and has their own reasons for why you want, and you want to have your own friend to talk to about your family, or to support you, or you're chosen to have a chosen family. So friendship is a choice we make, and I want to say that we vet all of our volunteers, even now during COVID-19, where we have pivoted everything to being on the phone, on the internet. We're creating videos for people who have internet with our pet visitation program. Many people do not have internet, at least in places that we serve. In Newton, I think that may be less likely, but in the inner city, there are more people who do not actually, do not have the affordability of a computer or phone, or paying for Wi-Fi, although I'm sure that's true in Newton as well. We haven't found it as true. But we are using also old-fashioned making of cards, and sending cards to people, or pen pals, which are really nice. The lost art of writing is lovely, as well as the importance of phone and seeing each other FaceTime if we can. But we're recruiting volunteers still now, and we are doing training. We're doing query checks to make sure there are no scams. We are keeping this up. Even tonight, there's a volunteer training, I know, for some of our newer volunteers. And with older adults, we do like when somebody refers somebody rather than self-referrals, but people can self-refer only because then we know if there's another network around. If a volunteer finds that there's some support needed, that we know what network they have or don't have. We have about 18 staff, 19 staff, 400 plus volunteers, and serve touch the lives of about 2,000 older adults each year. The reciprocity is really important. Everything that we do is personalized. It's about you. It's about what are your desires, your needs, your passions. What would you like to talk about? If you get an hour or 2 or 3 a week to have a friend, just visit with you on the phone in person, what is it? If you love science, we'll try and get you, who loves to talk about science. If you love baseball, we'll try and get that when it's in person. If you like to play games, if you want somebody to walk with you each week. So we try as hard as we can to personalize things. We don't just match any 2 people. We take into account who the volunteers, who the elder is, and how far they live from one another. And even during COVID-19, we're trying to match people near where they live, so that when we are able to visit in person again, which we so believe in, that you will have, you'll be nearby and it wouldn't be a burden to come to visit. And so next slide, please. Thank you. This woman was matched with actually I think it's earlier, with a gentleman who then couldn't, he still keeps in touch with her. He was matched with her like for 2 years, and his life changed. So he's still in touch with her by phone, but we got another match for her. She also moved to more, she was completely independent living when we met her, and now is, in more supportive housing. And she said, I almost lost my hope until someone referred me to you. People like you are the ones who make the real difference in other people's lives. You have really changed my life and given me hope. Knowing you are there is like a lifeline. What she also said is that she talked about her match is a young man of Asian descent. She is a white, older woman, and she talks about like how unlikely would a friendship like that be, would happen, and that they learn and they love each other so much, and how much they gain from one another, and what they share, and stories that they gain from one another. And so it's just beautiful when those things, it feels like sometimes the matches are just meant to be. And we work hard at doing that. We have staff that have a very good gut, and not that every match is the same, and if not everyone works out, but the vast majority of them do. And I just want to say that Kara Jeter, who has been our coordinator in Newton, and is will no longer, we now have somebody else there, but she just got a call from actually an elder in Newton on Friday, just to tell her, it was out of the blue, she said, just to tell her how much she loves her volunteer. And she was matched during COVID, so they actually have never met in person, how much she loves her, how they've truly connected. And Kara said, well, I hope that, then you'll get to meet each other after COVID-19. And she said to her, I don't really need to. I love it the way that it is. So we were surprised, but that how it's enriching her life just having those phone calls. So there's so much more I could say about the work, the matches that we have, more stories to tell you. But I will say that FriendshipWorks was there before COVID-19. We've done a lot of pivoting and during this time, because we so believe in being visiting, in person, holding somebody's hand, giving a hug or whatever, but none of us can do that now. But social connection can continue as best that it can, even during these times. We were there before, we're there now, we're here now, we're serving more people now. We had 83 new referrals in the last few weeks, which is crazy, which we're trying to match, and we are. And we will be here after COVID-19. And unfortunately, this issue of social isolation and loneliness will continue until we as a society figure out all the different constructs we need to make sure that it doesn't. But we are one part of the solution, I believe. I don't think we're the only one, but it is, we have found that it's incredibly important both to the young people who may be the volunteer or matched, as well as to the older adult. And so every match helps at least 2 people, and often their entire family structure, who knows now that they each have a new friend. So I welcome questions at the end of this program, or if you're interested in any involvement of any level. to please reach out to me. If you can go to the next slide, please. I'm going to close this section in a moment. Here's some, we can skip this. I'm sorry, I actually sent you the wrong slideshow, so I took this out of the last one. But this is a walk we just had to end elder isolation that happened in the middle of May. We did it virtually this year. We had, people coming, we did it online, and maybe next year some of you can join us. We do it the Sunday after Mother's Day every year. This was our 5th year. We started 5 years ago and intend for it to be an annual event. It is the only walk to end elder isolation in this country so far. Other people have written to us in other states saying they'd like to start one. And this year it was walking together, though we were walking apart and people walked. And the last slide, please. And this is just our information for anybody, if you want to leave it up for a moment, if anybody wants to, oh, and my name is, I really did send you the wrong slideshow to put up. I'm so sorry. I had the right one up because my last name is spelled wrong there, so you will not reach me there, but it is J. My last name is Seckel, S-E-C-K-E-L. Cerrotti, or you can reach out to anybody in Newton at the Senior Center. They know how to reach me or how to reach FriendshipWorks. You can reach us through the Newton Senior Center if you want to, because this slide is not correct, although our website is. So thank you very much for your interest and for listening. And again, I'm happy to answer questions or take phone calls after tonight as well. And I now have the pleasure of passing the baton on to Val Walker.
Thank you, Janet. I'm so glad you talked about the difference between isolation and loneliness. Yes, I would like to start off by saying that I've been very intrigued on what is it that keeps us feeling ashamed, and what is the stigma around loneliness and isolation. When you can really admit to yourself, whether you're 65 years old or 85 or 25, and say, gosh, I'm really lacking people in my life. I just don't have people to call, to talk to, whether it's for support emotionally, or I don't have anybody to help me out when I have to move out of this house. Or you start finding that there's an enormous stigma and a real sense of shame, really, coming right down to it, that you're lacking support, you're lacking friends, you're lacking something, maybe even yourself is lacking something. And as a rehabilitation counselor for 25 years, before the story happened to me that I'm going to share in a minute, I used to be very proud to help some of the most marginalized, disadvantaged people who were homeless, people with severe mental illness. I was both a case manager and a rehabilitation counselor. And I helped people build community, build networks. I became a kind of, basically, I thought I knew everything about how to get people connected who were really feeling very disconnected in the world. People also with brain injury, people who had serious physical illnesses. As a rehabilitation counselor, my whole meaning for work and life was all about helping people build community and see themselves contributing somehow to others. And so I thought I really knew enough to write my first book 10 years ago about how to be comforting for others in times of change and loss. But something really powerful happened to me back in 2012, long before COVID, and hopefully my story will have some meaning and application for COVID now, which actually I'm testing it out myself, I think so. What happened to me in 2012? I was 58 years old back then. I'm a baby boomer. I'm single. I wasn't able to have children due to medical reasons. I had been divorced for quite a while, and I didn't have family very close, very near, and I wasn't able to turn to my family for support. So back when I was 58 years old, I lived in Portland, Maine. I had been working as a mental health counselor and case manager for quite some time in Portland, Maine. And lo and behold, I needed surgery. I had a cancer scare and I needed a very quick hysterectomy, and I organized a couple of my friends to help me out. And it was basically, I thought I had everything lined up, and I found out the very next day after the surgery, I was lying in my hospital bed, IV wrapped around me, and my phone starts to buzz. And I picked it up and noticed that my friend said, "Sorry, there's been a family emergency. We can't come." And I didn't know what to do. And they said, "Well, somebody should be calling you. I'm trying to get a friend to help you out." Well, that friend who was supposed to help out of the friend never did call. And I kept, I was groggy. I was in pain. But the hospital still was going to discharge me at 3 that afternoon. You know, they don't keep even a 58-year-old in the hospital very long after a hysterectomy. So I didn't know what to do. I reached out and I called a few people, and I looked at Facebook, and to make a long story short, I couldn't find anyone for hours and hours, and the hospital discharged me, and I sat in the lobby. This was Maine Medical Center. And I sat there until 1 in the morning before I found anybody who could take me home. And even when I went home, I've had to find another person that I actually had to pay to stay with me the next day. So I was shocked. I was shocked, and at first I was so dismayed, and I understood my friend's predicament, but actually I didn't know the whole story at the time. But I felt enormously shattered that how could this happen? How could this happen to a person who's been on the planet over 5 decades, who's built relationships, friendships, wrote a book, had a lot of people. I wrote a book for Penguin as a publisher. I thought I was so well connected. I thought I was the goddess of getting people connected as a rehabilitation counselor for 25 years. And it was so humbling and shocking, and mostly I felt enormous shame. What is wrong with this picture? Why can't I count on my friends? Do I have to go begging and calling people around saying, "Can you please help me?" So that was my rude awakening. I won't get into the details. But around 7 months later, I decided to write a book about this because I was so shocked that I couldn't actually talk about this very easily with anybody. And I thought I would write about it and journal about it, and it started turning into a book. But also I said, you know what? I had to change my life and move to the Boston area from Maine because my car had broken down. I had a lot of colitis. That's a chronic illness I have that was making me very weak and tired, and it was harder for me to work. And I needed to change the kind of work. I needed to earn more money. And lots of things were kind of closing down for me in Maine. And then I moved to Boston. I was fortunate to find a roommate and started my whole life over again from scratch. And I really didn't know anybody in Boston. And my first job paid really well. It was much better than what I had had in Maine. And the problem was, being in my late 50s, a lot of the people I worked for, including my boss, was about in their 30s, you know, and I also had a certain amount of anxiety. I was nervous, you know, felt very unfamiliar with a lot of things. But what happened was, about a month after I started my job, the Boston Marathon bombing happened. Just a month after I had been at this job. I was working as a case manager for a social service agency. And we had to go home, of course, you know how that was. We couldn't go to work for a few days. And I returned to work a few days after that. And one particular coworker, who I call Pat, of course I changed names of people in my book, but this person called Pat was really looking miserable. And she wasn't her typical self, working at her desk. And there weren't very many people who had come back to work that day. And I noticed her, and she just looked she looked really bad, and I figured it must have had something to do with the bombing. I didn't know anything really much about her personal life. So I stepped up to her and I asked how she was, and she told me. She opened up and just said, I feel really bad. I've got to tell you something that happened. So I listened, and she told me about her 19-year-old son who had gone to the marathon to watch his friend run in the marathon, and his friend, her son's friend, got injured in the blast. And the son was pretty traumatized from it and was afraid to go see his friend at Mass General Hospital. He just was afraid. He didn't know what to say, what to do. And here was his mother talking to me. Pat was telling me, what should I say? What should I do? And I said, well, is his friend just lying in the hospital bed? You know, and I said, without telling her my story, I said to Pat, you know, something's got to happen, because there's nothing worse than lying in a hospital bed with nobody to see you. And she said, you're so right. I've got to get him to go. I said, even if you don't know what to say, even if your son doesn't know what to do or say, just show up. That's what counts. That's what makes all the difference. Believe me, even if he just hugs his friend, it's okay. So I was delighted to hear, just a few days later, Pat approached me at work and said, you know what? My son did go see his friend. And lo and behold, that friend introduced him to other friends in the hospital who had also been injured. And her son bonded with the other guys who had been injured, and they even partied a little bit together. And the son was going, gosh, I'm so glad I did that. I just busted through my fears and showed up. And he said to his mom, he said, you know, Boston Strong doesn't mean you have to be strong. It just means showing up. And you don't have to be strong to show up. Well, boy, did a light bulb go off in my head. All the isolation and pain and shame of loneliness I had felt, especially since lying in that hospital the year before. That son said just the right thing. I said, you know what? I'm going to write this story. I'm going to tell this and make a book about the importance of showing up, even if you don't know what to say or what to do. And that what isolates us so much of the time is that sense, that shame, that stigma. Well, who am I? Am I qualified enough to show up? You know, people didn't even like me that much on that job, but when I saw how lonely and sad Pat looked. So what happened for me to bust out of the isolation I was in was that something in me touched me about her and drew me out of myself, that sense of caring, that sense of compassion. And I realized that can pull a lot of us out of our loneliness, and that helping others and reaching out can pull us out of our own sense of lack. And I also realized that that awful story that had happened to me could be turned into something of wisdom, it could be turned into a way to help others. So I found 15 other people, because I volunteered to write for the Health Story Collaborative through Dr. Annie Brewster over at Mass General Hospital. She has a storytelling collaborative called the Health Story Collaborative. And I wanted to start sharing stories, and I love interviewing people, because I had done that in my first book. I loved their stories, and I brought them in, profiled people with their stories about comforting. So I started sharing stories and writing stories as a volunteer for the Health Story Collaborative, and thanks to Dr. Annie Brewster, who gave me that opportunity. And I wrote about people who were isolated, and I wrote about people who were leaders in helping people make connections and break out of isolating situations, especially around illness and disability. And I found 15 other people to write a book with from doing that volunteering. So over the years, I put together 15 people. I got stories about isolation from addiction, from the opioid addiction. I got stories from people about illness of different kinds, mental illness, physical illness. Dr. Brewster herself deals with multiple sclerosis, which is quite open, telling her story of shame and breaking out of her isolation around being a doctor who had MS and how she had to push beyond that to build community. I found many other people in my book sharing stories about how they broke out of isolation, but the common denominator was sort of similar to Pat's son, about showing up and breaking through your isolation by something that pulls you out of yourself, that really means a lot to you. And I found that actually most of the people in my book, including myself, were able to take what isolated us and turn it into a way to unite us with others, especially if you found people who were isolated by the same thing you were. So you find folks, say Robin Houston Bean, whose son, she tells her story of losing her son with an overdose of an opioid crisis in her family. And she was able to break out of her isolation by finding support groups in Braintree. And little by little, she got strong enough through the support groups to want to start a more specialized support group for mothers. And she built a whole foundation around that. So over and over, the stories that I profiled, the ones in my book as well as my story, keep saying over and over, what isolates us can be turned into what unites us with others. So I went ahead, I built support back to me in my life here in the Boston area, because I started with no connections. So through support groups, through writing for Dr. Brewster's website, through also, that was both volunteering and going to support groups. I went to a support group for Crohn's and colitis. I have that chronic illness that gets in the way of your social life quite a bit, and it makes you very tired. I was very isolated in many ways because of having colitis, and it caused me to miss a lot of time on my job as well, and caused difficulties across my life through illness. So finding other people who had been through isolating situations around colitis and Crohn's disease also helped me build a community. So once again, I kept finding the same theme around, you find the people that have been isolated and they understand your story, they understand you, and then you build that confidence back, you eradicate that stigma, you bust out of that shame and all those myths and all those expectations. And by golly, here I was in my 6th decade. And when all that happened 7 years ago, when I started my book, I was so ashamed. I said, well, how can I be here for 6 decades and not have enough friends, or to feel so bad about my loneliness and feel so alone and bad about that? Like, it's some kind of measure of your self-worth to have lots of friends, you know. So I realized after all these experiences of building support and building community in the Boston area, and actually my book, 400 Friends and No One's to Call, really sings the praises of how good Boston has been to me. I was telling everybody at the beginning of the book, I have to go to Mass to save my ass. And in many respects, financially, it helped a lot. Money talks, but so did the wonderful people I met through working with Dr. Brewster's Health Story Collaborative and going to the colitis support groups and volunteering in other ways. And then there was one other friend that loves Walden Pond, and she's a volunteer for the Thoreau Society. And so one of the other wonderful ways I got connected was because I love Emerson and Thoreau and Walden Pond, and I ended up living in Maynard, so I'm a Concord wannabe. I live in Maynard now, so I can take a lot of walks around Walden Pond. But I made a friend who went to a little restaurant on Main Street in Concord, and I just was having lunch one day after a long walk around the pond, and we just hit it off because she was reading a brochure. She was actually editing the brochure as a volunteer for the Thoreau Society, and she actually was a docent who shows people around Thoreau's home. So it was like a wonderful thing to talk about. So gosh darn, she invited me not only to do a tour, but then started inviting me to some parties. So I actually started having a social life because of Walden Pond. So all these surprising things happen. First of all, you can't just look for your tribe. A lot of times you might be surprised. You go beyond that tribe. You might be surprised. And lo and behold, here's COVID-19 in my life, in a lot of people's life. And I want to put out there that helping others, volunteering, being a part of your community, reaching out to people who are even lonelier and more isolated than you are. You know, I realized what happened to me with my book and my experiences. I became an advocate, a real advocate, not just a rehabilitation counselor advocating for people who were marginalized and disconnected, but I became a real honest to God advocate for lonely people, you know, and I wrote the book. I couldn't find, I'm so darn proud. It came out in March with Central Recovery Press. And I'm gonna just throw out a few other good tips for dealing with COVID right now. Besides, a lot of science shows how helping others and volunteering does enormous things for anxiety and feeling helpless and powerless. That just even having a routine of volunteering or checking in with people on a regular basis is enormously empowering. It gives you a sense of purpose and structure. Also taking classes and joining support groups. Again, the message of finding people who have been isolated by similar issues in life. And finally, reaching out to long lost contacts. I've been rediscovering people from 20 and 30 years ago during COVID-19 because I've been so darn lonely sometimes. It's like, who do I know? And I've gone through my closet and found old Rolodexes and God knows what, and found yearbooks and been rediscovering a whole bunch of people from when I was 15 years old and 25. And so I've been finding people, and most of the people I've reached out to and called during COVID, I have a really good excuse to check in on people now. So COVID can actually be a unifying situation. We can turn that isolating force into a unifying force. We've got to be more proactive and more of an advocate than ever now. The best thing of all is that COVID-19 has made it more acceptable to say, I'm lonely and I'm isolated. We now have a good excuse. We can stop blaming ourselves like I was doing back in 2012. And let's turn it into action and take action. Just like the people I profiled in my book, they turned it around. And I feel so much better now than I did 7 years ago. And when I recently had cancer, I had a thyroid cancer recently. It was very small, but guess what? I was able to have friends pick me up from the hospital. I was able to have a bunch of people check in on me. We even had a party. So let me tell you, that was before COVID. But I just want you to know, I built myself a whole social life in the greater Boston area in 7 years, and it does take a few years. It doesn't happen overnight. So back to seniors, I'm a senior in my mid-60s now. I'm a happy baby boomer that's rediscovered the importance of community. And I wish I had more time to share more, but thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to applaud, even though we're not in a room together, I'm applauding our panelists. Yes. If people know the new applause is that you can kind of raise your hands and wave them on the screen.
I talked too long, sorry.
No, you didn't. It was excellent. You were
all
wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
I want to say, this is Jane Colino again. I want to thank the panelists because they brought different perspectives to a really broad issue. It's a personal issue, it's a community issue, but as you can see, it gets into the world of crime, it gets into the world of writing, it gets into the world of everything. And before we take questions, I want to make sure that people know that the chat button on the bottom of their screen is where they can click on and ask a question. Is that right, Ellen? Or are people able to do that right now, or?
Yes, they will be able to chat to me as
to you and to Alana. Okay, thank you. So you'll see a chat button. It's going to go to the two people who are taking the questions, and then they're going to feed them to me. and I'll be able to ask the right person to answer them or put them out there. So take a look at your chat button. In the meantime, I just wanted to say a couple of comments before we jump into the questions. One is, there's a student reporter actually at the meeting here, and one of the questions that she had asked me earlier on a phone call before the program was, why did we talk about this subject? And although we're all here because there's something that interested us about this subject, I wanted to be very clear that this was very deliberate, that this was an effort of the Newton Council on Aging, that Julie Norstrand is the chairperson of what's called the RISE subcommittee, and RISE stands for Respect, Inclusion, and Social Engagement, and that the city of Newton entered into a process to become an age-friendly community. And through the community engagement process that's required, we talked with hundreds of people. And in the end of that community engagement process, we asked people to help us to prioritize the areas that the Newton Department of Senior Services and the Newton Council on Aging would focus on. And the first priority area that the community weighed in on that it felt we needed to focus on was isolation and loneliness. And although some people who were participating in this hadn't felt it themselves, they were impacted by it because of family members, or they had concern for others who were experiencing isolation and loneliness. And this again was before COVID. As Val said, it kind of makes it easier for people to identify as lonely and maybe needing some connections. And in Newton, through our partnership with FriendshipWorks, there are 40 matches that have been made in our first year of partnership with FriendshipWorks. And if you ask either side of those relationships the benefit, you're going to find it may be different benefits, but there are benefits on both sides of those relationships. And even the volunteers who may not have been feeling lonely are feeling less lonely and less isolated because of the relationships that they've created through the FriendshipWorks program. I also want to note that on the chat button, Ellen has shared several websites as resources. So please take note of those. You can copy and paste them right there from the chat area. You'll see Val's for FriendshipWorks and the Newton Senior Services Department's website. So Ellen or Alana, have you sent me any questions? Okay. Anybody in the audience, feel free to go ahead and send any questions through the chat. Do any of the panelists want to add anything while people are thinking about some questions? Maybe we should unmute all the panelists.
I'd like to add something.
All right.
And this maybe follows on what Val said and Marian and Ryan, is that I want to speak about the reciprocity of like making matches and creating friendships. Like I said, friendship is a two-way street. It's not, there are programs and there's reasons to have programs where you do something for somebody else, right? There's a lot of human service programs like that where you become the caregiver, where you become the advisor, the therapist, whatever. At least with FriendshipWorks, and I know other programs like this, it is about making a match, at least if you do it carefully. And so we've had experienced times, well, first of all, some of the volunteers are sometimes older than the people they visit, because you can be a very healthy 80-year-old and you can, for whatever reasons, have an illness when you're 60 or 20 or 30 or whatever. But I've had some of the younger volunteers who say, my friends, they don't remember anything I tell them. They're all in their own world, and one of the reasons they love visiting an older adult is they miss having their grandparents or their parents around, that it gets them out of their little bubble and gets a different perspective. And also that the person that they're visiting with the week after will say, hey, how's this? They'll remember everything that they said. For the older adult who's not seeing somebody very often, it helps them to remember, to have a reason to remember things, to share the news and so forth. But I share this, and we've also had some younger volunteers who have gotten ill, for whatever reason, because illness hits every age group, and their friend, their match, is the one who was the person who was there for them,
Oh,
who helped take care of, certain things, or started to call them when they became sick. And so when you do, and that's why I'm really hoping that anybody who's on this call, if you know people who you think would really benefit from a match, what you're doing is you're opening your home to somebody. For an older adult to be alone at home and to trust somebody coming in, a new person, I feel like you're a host or a hostess. You're not a recipient. We don't use sometimes you have to use terms like that to write grants or whatever, but that's not how we see it. You are the other half of the friendship. And of course, we train our volunteers to err on the side of listening, because it's more likely that the volunteer is somebody who is out and about and has networks, and maybe the person we're visiting has less of that, and we all need to talk and share, but also to tell the friend that they're visiting with, the older adult they're visiting with, if they've had a lousy day, if they've had a fight with their boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse, or if they just lost their job, or if they're not feeling well, to share that, because we're all making ourselves vulnerable. And that's the thing about a close friendship, is that you allow yourself to be vulnerable. And that elder who is opening their home for a visitor is making themselves vulnerable. And we think it's incumbent upon the volunteer, if you're going to be a friend, to make yourself vulnerable too. And therefore to really have a true friendship. So I hope that if people are shy about asking for somebody to visit, to recognize the fact that you are giving a gift of your friendship too. And that you're not just receiving something, you are truly giving something to somebody else. And they wouldn't come if they didn't want to. This is a free gift from the heart. This is all volunteer. Nobody's getting paid to do this. They're coming because they want to. And so anyway, you get the point. I just really feel it's really important in our country. We still quite haven't figured out the role that we play when we get retired and so forth. It's a big country and others, but I still believe that as we get older, we're better listeners, or we hope to be, that we might have some wisdom, we have experience to share, and we're needed.
So Janet, you're so convincing that somebody wants to know, are there friendship work programs in places like New Jersey?
There are friendship work type programs all over the country, but not all of them have. A lot of them do medical escorts. Not everybody does friendly visiting, but there are in different parts of the country, and it's definitely worth either calling if you have a family member or a friend, or if it's you who's on the phone, to check with the Council on Aging, the Area Agency on Aging. If you want to check with, there's the National Volunteer Caregiving Network, which we are a member of and helped to found, with NVCN, National Volunteer Caregiving. So there's a really, really good program in New Jersey, actually, that does friendly visiting. So depending where in New Jersey you are, there's a wonderful person with a great director down there. So New Jersey's not so, we think of it as small, but it's a big state. So if you want to check out the National Volunteer Caregiving Network website, you can find out, or you can call me and I can look it up and find out for you.
One of the things that, Janet mentioned is how people might be reluctant to ask for help. And I think one of the other side of that is, we probably all know someone, whether it's a neighbor or someone at work or any of those things, that we think probably is lonely. And one of the questions that came up as we were doing this work last year is, no one wants to go to someone's door when we could do that and say, gee, I think you're lonely. How can I help you? But one of the things we learned from some of our experts, and it's really so simple, but it's almost counterintuitive, is that we all want to be needed and helpful. And that one of the simplest ways to begin a relationship is to ask someone to do a favor for you that a small favor, that they would be able to do. So maybe you ask a neighbor if they wouldn't mind taking a package for you, or picking up, assuming they are mobile enough to do it, picking up your mail or something like that. And what the doctor really taught us was, because now I've done that for you. I want to be helpful. So most people are going to, of course, say, yes, I'll do that for you. And then it begins that bridge where they can come back across and maybe say, would you mind getting a package for me? And you start that back and forth. And then maybe when you drop off the package, it's, can we share a cup of coffee? And, you know, that's a way to build, because I think lots of times it isn't just, we do want to show up, we don't know what to do, and you don't want to do the wrong thing, and you don't want to make someone feel that they are lonely or that they need sort of a charity performance. And really asking them to do something for you is a way to let them, you know, feel needed. And if they say no, well, they say no. And if they say yes and nothing ever comes of it, well, it doesn't come of it, but it is a good start. And
Yeah.
it's just an easy tip that's I would never have thought of myself.
Yeah, that's a
Love that.
really good point, DA Ryan. We actually have a follow-up question for you. What actions or organizations like the fire department, what's your experience if another part of government goes into the home and finds concerns? What do you find typically as the response at the local level?
We have done a lot of training about that here in Middlesex County, about them filing a report with Elder Services, reaching out to the Council on Aging in their town, calling us. I would say we get a significant number of referrals now from fire departments and from ambulance companies. And it's because we've been out there, we've done that training with them. You know, we're saying, look, you might be the only person in that house in 3 weeks. Take a look. You know, and we've done the pieces of somebody whose clothing is ripped and bedraggled, their glasses are broken. You know, that's somebody who needs some intervention, and reach out and try to help them with that.
Mhm.
So I'd say here in Middlesex County, that is very high.
Yep, yep.
Can I
You know,
add-
one of the things I'd like to say is also what we see at the senior center, and what I often hear is, you know, why did you participate in something? And it's often because somebody invited me. My friend said, you know, I'm doing this yoga class, come join me. And so we kind of try to build on that. And again, Julie Joy is our program coordinator. She's on the call, and we're looking at volunteers today who can't be working with us because the senior center is closed, and looking at connecting them with each other to keep each other less isolated and connected. Now, they're not reaching out necessarily to say, I need that, but we know that there's a different way that people need to be connected in this day and age, and both of them will be doing something for each other.
Mhm.
Did I hear somebody try to say something?
I just wanted to bust in and say that there's some wonderful initiatives. I help out at the Needham Senior Center at Center at the Heights, and Aisha Kelly has been organizing. I just want to throw out the intergenerational benefits that high school students and really young Gen Z people, under 22, people who are teens, they're finding that what's happened, for example, at the Needham Council on Aging, and I know this is happening in a lot of different places all around the country, is that high school students or middle school students are being matched up to do check-in phone calls as part of their community service for their school. And a lot of the younger people and Generation Zs are also the other extreme, also very isolated. So it's really beautiful to connect the different generations together and have the high school students checking in and the seniors, and building relationships that way too. So I just wanted to throw that out there. There's some intergenerational volunteer situations going through some of the public school systems, getting students to check in. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
It's called the Phone Pal program over at the Needham Council on Aging.
Great. So the general sense of the questions have been asked and answered. I think don't be shy. Reach out, offer something, ask for something from somebody to help create that relationship. And it helps to break your isolation as well as others. And so I'm going to hand the program back to Ellen Myers. And once again, I just want to thank everybody for your interest. I want to thank our panelists, our staff, and again, the Council on Aging Committee that was the impetus to put this program together. Back to you, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Jane, and I echo your sentiments. I want to thank all the panelists, the Department of Senior Services, both you and Alana, and Julie Norstrand from the Council on Aging, and also for our esteemed mayor for joining us. It's been a very educational program that I hope many will benefit from. I do want to say that the Newton Free Library and the Department of Senior Services have many virtual programs that are happening on a daily basis. So watch for email updates from the library or senior services. I know the library has an online calendar at newtonfreelibrary.net, virtual events. And where can people find the senior services listings online, Jane?
newtonseniors.org.
Okay, that's
That's pretty straightforward. We claimed that domain way back when. Ellen, if I could put in a plug as well, on the 17th of June, the Council on Aging, once again, really in direct response to the pandemic, has put together an amazing program. Please visit our website. It is on our website. It is empowering older residents post-quarantine, pre-vaccine, to re-engage in the community. And we have a fabulous speaker, Dr. Michael Minna, who is an epidemiologist who's been working closely under the governor's administration, looking at the stopping of COVID and the containing of COVID. And we will have some curated questions that we will have asked him, and the program will be taped and available. But if you want to join us live next Saturday, I'm sorry, next the 17th of June at 7 o'clock, please visit our website and register for the program.
Thank you so much, everyone. We wish you well.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.